Over the past month and a bit, Marvel's Rivals has been on a tear. Its player count is off the charts, and it's doing a great job of bringing in people who are diehard comic book fans and people who are just general audiences playing the game for hours on end. The game is simply just fun. Of course, when something gets this big, it makes me think, what if DC had something like this? I've seen a couple of videos on YouTube who have gone through this premise, but I made sure not to watch those videos because I didn't want to feel as if I was stealing any of their ideas. This is what I've decided to do. I'm going to give you every single character, and I'm going to give you 4 abilities: their melee ability, their passive aggressive ability, and their special. Obviously, if this was a real game, every character would be a lot more in depth than what I'm going to go into, and they would even have more abilities and powers than I have given them in this list. There's 35 characters in the game as of right now, so I made 35 DC characters for a DC Rivals. If you guys do end up liking this video, I will make a part 2 where we go into details about power-ups and team-ups with other characters, just like the actual game has. So, starting with the first character, Batman. He is DPS, of course, and he's going to have hand-to-hand combat melee capabilities, so that would be his R2. This means Batman does have to get up close and personal. However, he also does have multiple batarangs that can be thrown, about 3, and they ping the location of targets when the attacks land. I like to think that the batarangs do the job on its own and locates targets, or you could even remote control them just the way you can do in the Arkham games. He also has a grapple and glide attack to help him get around the map easier, and to also bring in a lot of what we love from Batman from those Arkham games. A lot of what he does in the Arkham world has become a staple to what Batman can do in combat. Then when you add in the glide attack, it now becomes a damage dealing move instead of a maneuver. As for his special, in which I called it the Dark Knight, which does damage, he does repel from rooftops and ceilings and grappling points where he hangs enemies upside down, leaving them defenseless for your teammates to move in and do additional damage. I did consider bringing in the Batmobile for a special move, however I was trying to take into consideration what the maps would look like and if it would really be viable in every type of scenery, so for now I decided to do the stealth takedowns. Now we move on to Superman, who is a tank. His regular melees are punches and lunge punches. Then he has a flight/aerial strike where he can swoop in or smash the ground, dealing heavier damage. He also has temporary invulnerability where he takes no damage whatsoever, and I like this idea of if he is getting shot by characters with ranged attacks or guns, perhaps those shots do go off him and go into opposing characters, taking small amounts of damage from it. And then his special, in which I called the Last Son of Krypton, it's a massive prolonged heat ray blast. Imagine the scene from Batman vs Superman when Superman is doing a laser showdown with Doomsday. It would be about that size, if not larger. It would be unblockable no matter the character you use, and if you do get caught in the blast, it would be very difficult to escape it. Then we look at Wonder Woman, who I threw into the DPS category. She would have a sword and shield melee attack. She would have the Lasso of Truth, which would allow her to throw enemies and or cancel one of their abilities. Her shield can also be used to block, but when it takes in enough damage, she can use the kinetic energy from the shield and blast it out against her enemies. And then for her special, which I called it Warrior Princess, she uses her bracelet charge, which has become so popular from the movies, and it is a one-shot elimination. You do have time to escape the blast or the perimeter perimeter of the blast, but if you are caught in it, you are done. Then we have Green Lantern, who would be a tank, and this could be any Green Lantern you could think of, really. I made this one going into the anticipation of John Stewart, as per usual. His regular melee would be ring projectiles or melee weapons for close quarter combat. I could imagine John using something like an assault rifle or a combat knife. He would also be able to create Green Lantern bubbles or shields, something that goes around the perimeter of another character's body that's capable of granting them damage protection. Either they don't take damage for a couple of seconds at all, or the damage intake is highly minimal. I think he would also have a ring grab where he'd be able to grab enemies and throw them or hit them off surfaces or bring them in close and then be able to do close quarter combat damage. For the special, in which I ended up calling it In Brightest Day, the ring will exude multiple constructions that attack all players within the vicinity. Then we have Flash, who is a DPS, and his regular melee is super speed punches. Then we go into his dashes and phases to dodge and escape enemies. However, when doing so, if you manage to dodge or phase through an enemy player, it does do damage to them as well. He also has electricity and lightning stun effects where he can use his hand to vibrate, send it through surfaces, or simply just hit someone with it that leaves them stunned for about 3 or 4 seconds. The character can still attack, but they can't really move that well. For his special, I called it the fastest man alive, and there's 2 options you could go here. You could go the classic route of the Flash Tornado that spins in a vicinity and anyone near it gets sucked in and damaged, or you could do something a little cooler, a little more cinematic. He spans around the map at a super fast rate, unseeable by any opposing character, who are then receiving a high amount of damage, and they're not capable of stopping him through the special's runtime. Now we look at Zatanna, our first healer. She has magical bolts and projectiles that can damage enemies or heal teammates. Then she has force fields that heal teammates but stun and damage enemies if caught inside. She has runes that can change her magical bolts to different elements to apply damage to enemies or healing factors to allies. Her special, which is called Sorceress Supreme, she creates a large perimeter that locks passive, aggressive, and special moves of all enemies from being used. Now we look at Lex Luthor, who's also a DPS and works somewhat similarly to how Iron Man does. For his regular attacks, he has energy palm strikes for distance and energy wrist blades for melee attack. They're all made from kryptonite plasma, so perhaps you could do something where if he fights a Kryptonian, they might take a little more damage than usual. He has a red sun force field which protects him from damage and deals burning damage to enemies who get near. He has boot thrusters that lunge Luthor into the air, firing multiple types of projectiles in multiple directions. His special is simply called Lex Luthor, but I imagine him saying it the way he did in the DC Universe Online trailer. He uses a satellite interface that targets all nearby enemies and rains down missiles. Now we move into Martian Manhunter, who is a tank. His regular attack, he can stretch out his arms for short to medium range punches. He can morph into Martian style beasts for heavy damage and defense for teammates. He can also fly, and while flying can strafe heat ray horizontally and vertically. For his special, which I called Furnace, he turns into his hidden psyche. His size is huge, his attack damage and defense is tripled, while burning damage is taken by enemies in his vicinity. Then we have Dr. Fate, who is another tank. For his regular attacks, he has Ankh and Lightning Bolt melee attacks. He's also got mythical augmentation to heighten his health and attack damage, and force fields or shields to block damage for allies. And I assume this one would be something similar to what Doctor Strange has in game, where he creates a massive shield and is capable of walking around with it. Then his special, which is called Lord of Order, his helmet almost becomes this very scary black hole situation where he drags his enemies into Naboo's dimension, and it is a one-shot KO. Now we head into Raven, a healer. She has empath soul orbs that heal nearby allies and damage nearby enemies. She has a psychokinesis ability which opposing team healers will heal her allies when targeted. And then she has multiple Eldritch Blasts, which when impacting explode and either heal allies in the area or damage enemies with random elemental damage, and that could be fire, darkness, whatever else. Her special is called Daughter of the Demon. She can unleash hell upon the map with burning lavas and fires, and her size is altered to the likes of Trigon. Now we have Deadshot, who's a DPS. His regular attacks are wrist cannon melee damage. He carries a sniper rifle that does very heavy damage if you can hit your shots, and he's also equipped with 2 to 3 grenades that recharge over time. His special is called The Man Who Never Misses. Every single shot taken from his wrist cannons hit, and his sniper rifle, if he manages to hit, is a one-hit kill. Then we look at Lady Shiva, DPS as well. Her regular move is quick martial art melee attacks. She also utilizes Dim Mak, which she can stun opponents to do heavy damage, knowing exactly where to hit on the body to capitalize on her damage as much as she can. She also has a stamina increase ability where she can escape from battle, move faster than any other regular character. Also, her attacks and her moves are faster than usual as well. Her special is called the Master Assassin. She swiftly bounces between opponents, dealing heavy damage, very similar to Iron Fist's special. Then we look at Deathstroke, DPS again. He can switch between swords and assault rifles for his base attack. He has a sword dash or slash ability, which allows him to get around the map quicker, of course, but also deals damage if he uses it next to a character, which is then followed up by a couple of pistol shots. He also has EMP grenades that cancel out random abilities, and you don't know which one it is. It could be the passive, it could be the aggressive, it could be other. It could even stop an enemy special from recharging for a short period. His special is called the Terminator. He's equipped with the Icon suit and an energy lance. His health is extremely increased, with the lance acting as a dual weapon of melee and energy blasts, doing more than ordinary damage. Now we have Swamp Thing, who's a tank. He can whip large branches and vines for melee attacks, probably short to medium range. He has elemental control being tied to the earth, so he can boost his health and lower damage intake. And then he can smash down his arms or legs to create a pool of swamp matter that slow and damage enemies. For his special, called Avatar of the Green, he can implant his Flora consciousness into the body of an enemy who killed him, taking over their body and turning them into his new Swamp Thing body. I know I said body a lot of times. Body, 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 body. Then I went with Blue Lantern Saint Walker, who is a healer. He can fire Blue Lantern projectiles to heal allies or deal damage to enemies. He can use the Blue Lantern battery that heals anyone in the perimeter every 6 to 7 seconds. He can also plant a force field around himself that allows him to deal slow self-healing or turn attack damage into health. His special, which is called Hope Burns Bright, all allies, including himself, refuse all forms of damage for about 10 to 15 seconds. Even characters who choose to use their special ability, you don't take damage from it. Now we look at Joker, who's a DPS. He has a 6-shot magnum pistol for a regular attack, but every 6th shot before reloading is an explosive shell. He can also dispel Joker laughing gas from a short range that will actually leave characters laughing and has temporary damage over time. Close range damage, he has a crowbar that he can swing repeatedly for heavy damage. Then his special, which is called the Clown Prince of Crime, he throws multiple exploding teeth that chatter around the map and deals exploding damage. And if you find yourself in a situation where all the teeth are leading into one direction because the majority of characters are all surrounding one another, then it's going to become a one-shot kill. Then we look at Atrocitus, who's a tank. He has a lunging fury of punches for melee attacks. He can expel large quantities of burning blood from his mouth that of course deals burning damage, and he can shield 2 or 3 nearby allies, including himself, which is added on top of their health. His special is called Unstoppable Rage. He turns into a massive alien animal that can charge into enemies and deal other forms of damage. Think very reminiscent to the bull he turns into in his Injustice 2 special. Now we have Aquaman, who's a DPS. He has trident strikes for melee damage. Lightning strikes can also be dealt from the trident for medium range combat, and he has a ping or echolocation ability where Aquaman can sense the location of any enemy. And then his special, which is called Ruler of the Seas. He can summon a massive sea creature that swallows enemies and deals major damage to anyone outside of the jaw or the mouth of this sea creature. Closely connected to Aquaman, we then move on to Mera, who is a healer. She has water blasts or streams that heal her allies and deal low-level damage to enemies. She has a tidal wave ability that can help her maneuver and escape attacks. She can also place water bubbles or shields around allies for extra health. Her special, which is called the Queen of Atlantis, she can extract water from the bodies of enemies, which then ends up leaving them stunned, capable of doing even more damage from her allies. But that water she extracted from their bodies, she also gives it to her allies, healing them in the process. Then we move forward to Harley Quinn, who's a DPS. She has a hammer or mallet for her melee attacks. She has gymnastics and acrobatic evades and dodges to avoid all types of attacks. She has a pop gun that shoots out different ammunition every time, and it could be some of the craziest things. It could actually be bullets, or she could just straight up shoot out cupcake bombs. Her special is called the Clown Princess of Crime. She unleashes her coyotes, which follow her and attack anyone that she attacks. Now we move over to Cyborg, who's a tank. He has a laser cannon range attacks, medium to long range. Then he has boom tube technology that allows allies to traverse through, but enemies get zapped when near it. He can use the mother box technology to reverse the damage taken for himself and turn it into shield health. His special, called the Grid, he can hack into enemy specials and bring them down to 0% while targeting with a red laser beam from his eye and chest that also causes damage at the same time. Now we have Green Arrow, another DPS. He has bow and arrow shots for his regular attacks, no surprise there. They can also be charged up for extra damage. He has a zipline arrow that allows him to move around the high ground and get into areas that other characters may not be able to do. He also has martial arts attacks that are immediately followed up by a non-missable arrow shot, but he needs to get up close and personal for that one. His special is then called the Emerald Archer. What he can do is ricochet multiple exploding arrows across any surface that of course deal heavy exploding damage. Keeping it close, we have Black Canary next, who is also a DPS. She has acrobatic and fast-paced punches and kicks for melee, a combat takedown that kicks enemies away from her or into a group of allies to damage them further, and a small canary cry that disorients enemies and disables one of their abilities for a short time. However, her special is called the Canary Cry, cry as well. This increased Canary cry features Dinah moving at walking speed. Enemies hit by it have shaky screens and are taking ticking damage while caught inside. And it's no regular ticking damage, they are getting hurt quite heavily. Moving to Gorilla Grodd, who is a tank. He has a ranged telekinesis attacks, a psychic defense wall to block all projectiles. He also has a Gorilla Pounce where he can charge at high speed and or jump and crash land onto enemies. His special is called King Grodd, and it is the ability to transfer his mind into the body of any opposing enemy to then attack their allies. Now we have another tank in Bane. He has close quarter melee combat, which consists of multiple martial art moves. He has a leg stomp attack that deals pushing damage and tosses the opposing team back like a shockwave, similar to Superman. Then he has a venom charge where he runs and charges into enemies, simple as it is, while venom sprays from out of his tank that also do extra ticking damage if landing on enemies. His special is called I Will Break You. Think very similar to how he looked in Arkham Origins. He turns into a massive venom / titan fueled monster who does extraordinarily massive damage. Then we have Starfire, who's a DPS. She has Starbolt projectile attacks for medium and long range. She has a photokinesis ability where Starfire can generate the same wavelength of the sun, dealing nearby burning damage. She can also absorb enemy projectile for a short time and turn it into starbolts that come out of her eyes. Then her special is called the Goddess of Fire. She turns herself into the equivalent of a nuclear reactor and releases massive energy blasts from her body, eliminating anyone in the area. Then we move into Nightwing, who's DPS as well. His melee combat comes from the Eskrima sticks that can also emit electric bolts when charged. He has acrobatic evades, however enemies caught in his evading maneuvers will also receive some damage, and he can grapple to vantage points and throw wingdings in midair for a little extra touch as well. His special is called the Flying Grayson. He pinpoints enemy weaknesses and deals extra damage by utilizing all of his gadgets for quicker eliminations. Then to kind of clear out the Teen Titans here, we have Beast Boy, who is a DPS as well. One of the differences with him is his melee attacks differ depending on the animal he chooses to turn into, which one of his abilities is the ability to turn into a tiger, a grizzly bear, a snake, a hawk, etc. However, when not turned into an animal, he can turn a part of his body into a form of another animal to deal specific damage. His special is called Journey to the Red. Beast Boy can turn into an alien animal that has extra speed, extra health, and extra damage output. Then we have Enchantress, who is going to be a villain healer. She has raw arcane energy that can damage enemies or heal allies, and she has powerful force fields that can shield allies, but also empower ones that may be magic users on the team. She also has the ability to sever aggressive abilities from the opposing team members for a short period. Unlike Zatanna, who is called the Sorceress Supreme, Enchantress's special is the Sorceress Queen, who can revive all eliminated teammates. Now we look at Blue Beetle, specifically Jaime Reyes, who is a DPS as well. He can fire plasma cannons for ranged combat, and he uses his jet boots to fly into close combat situations, deploying an energy pulse, damaging anyone in the vicinity. He can then produce swords and maces for up close combat, where he does about 3 or 4 strikes. His special is called Power of the Scarab, and he can create a plasma style nuke with instant elimination if nearby. We look at another healer in Mr. Miracle. He can use the strange and unexplained technology of the Mother Box to heal allies. He uses arrow discs to get to specific vantage points and to heal his allies from areas that enemies wouldn't think he would be. But he can also use them to fling against his enemies to do damage. He is equipped with 3 electric bombs that can be thrown to stun and damage enemies, but also heals allies around it. His special is called the God of Freedom. He is completely unfazed by every enemy, passive, aggressive, and special attacks. Then we have Black Manta, a DPS. He's equipped with Atlantean knives for melee attack. He also has the, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right, the Oracolum Trident. He can throw and deal biofusion damage over time after the hit. He can then produce heat ray zaps from his helmet. His special is called Fear of the Seas. His suit can completely camouflage, of course temporarily, and he can use his abilities without giving any of his locations away. You literally won't be able to see even the outline of him for a short period. Then we look at Poison Ivy, who's a healer. She can fling thorns and vines for ranged combat, healing, and damaging. She can spawn and place up to 3 Venus flytraps that spit spores, which can also heal and damage enemies and allies. She can also dispel mind control and seduction pheromones to avoid taking damage from enemies. Her special, which is called You Can't Beat Mother Nature, she subdues and wraps all enemies in the area with all types of plants, squeezing them for damage, and they also take damage from allies who choose to attack them. We move into our last tank, who is Amazo. The difference about him as well is he can choose which teammates' regular combats he would like to use at the beginning of his match or whenever he respawns. He can nullify or cancel the abilities of those around him, and he also has absorption cells which add extra shield health. His special, which is called You Are Outmatched, he's capable of using another character's passive and aggressive ability along with their special, which is fully charged right after he just used his own special to obtain an enemy special. Last but not least, because of course there's always going to be DLC characters, but the last DPS here is Plastic Man. His abilities are to stretch his arms, legs, and body for melee attacks, and he can turn into random items around the map for a short period of time to try and surprise attack enemies or even hide from enemies. He can also slingshot himself into the opposing team or even stretch himself in midair to hit multiple people. His special is called Any Shape, Any Form. He takes a form where any attack projected onto him is directed right back to those specific enemies. But when his special ends, he is also gifted temporary invulnerability. So there it is, 35 characters of DC rivals and their specials and abilities. I feel like I have never talked back to back to back to back this way in any video I've ever recorded on this channel. So with that being said, guys, I hope you all did enjoy the video. Let me know in the comments below other characters you would like to see in a DC's Rivals, and maybe other abilities you'd like to see utilized that I didn't mention here. But also, let me know if you'd like to see a part 2 where I go through the team-ups that these characters would have and what abilities would come with that as well. That's it. I'm gonna take a breather, and I will talk to you all very soon.